Hey everybody, and welcome back. We are not here to record a set of notes. Instead, I'm here to walk you through the first part of the American Revolution DBQ. This is a rather long activity. It is worth 20 points instead of just the usual 5. So I wanted to kind of walk everybody through this in case you were absent the first day when we went over it. I want to kind of have these two things side by side. Now, the left side is the document packet where you're going to kind of read some primary sources and figure out what was going on during the time of the American Revolution. And on the right side, you've got your answer sheets. Now, for our video purposes today, I'm doing both these virtually. If you do want to choose to do these on paper, that's fine. Just ask me for a copy or find it in the bin in the back of the room. But for today, I'm going to be doing this both virtually so that you guys can see what we're going to be doing. And I want to start over here on my right side of my page with the directions. It says, today you are going to be answering the question, was the American Revolution virtuous? Meaning, was it done for the greater good? So that's the main question that we're going to be looking at. And we're going to figure out whether or not the American Revolution was worth fighting. And let's continue with the directions. It says, oftentimes the American Revolution is criticized for being a revolution enacted mostly by the rich to benefit rich Americans. Today we are going to read primary source documents and see what people at the time thought about the revolution. Okay, so what that's telling you is kind of a preview of what's to come. You are going to be looking through some primary source documents on both the American colonist side and on the English side. These are going to be clips from much longer documents. I have edited these to just include the important parts, and if we get to any vocab words, then they'll usually be down here in the box at the bottom of the page to kind of fill you in on what the different things mean. So we're going to do document A together, and then I'll explain what the must do, should do, and aspire to do activities are for the rest of the document. Okay, now that we've read our directions on the answer sheet, let's take a look at document A. It says it's from the First Continental Congress. And in the italics there, it gives a little bit of detail about that, in case you forgot from our notes. It says the First Continental Congress was a meeting of delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies. It convened in Philadelphia in the fall of 1774, about 6 months before the first battles broke out between the colonies and Britain. In the years before the first Congress, Britain had enacted a series of new taxes on its colonies. And if you're doing this right after the notes packet, then we just talked about those, and hopefully they'll be fresh in your mind. Down here, under the big line, this is where the primary source starts. It says, the elected delegates of this Congress declare that the inhabitants of the English colonies in North America, by the laws of nature and the English Constitution, have the following rights. Okay, so before we get into what they're listing here, we're finding out who wrote this document and who they're speaking on behalf of. So it's saying that these elected people chosen to represent the colonists have decided that all colonists should have these following rights. It says they're entitled to life, liberty, and property, and that the foundations of English liberty and of all free government is a right of the people to participate in their legislature. So that's telling us that people have the right to be free to participate in their legislature. And down here in the vocab it says a legislature is the group of people in a country with the power to make laws, including tax laws. So it's saying that people have the right to participate. It goes back to that idea of social contract that we talked about in Unit 1, that people give up something and get something in exchange. So people are giving up some freedom in the American colonies. They're giving up total freedom, and they expect something in return. Let's find out what they are continuing on to say. It says, and as the English colonists are not represented in the British Parliament, they have the right to their local legislatures, where their right of representation can alone be preserved in cases of taxation and internal government. It's saying here that the English colonists are not represented in British Parliament, meaning that people are not being given the right to vote and their voices aren't being heard. So they're having their money taken from them, but they don't have any say in how it gets spent or where it goes to or how it's supposed to help them. So they're saying that since British Parliament is not listening to them, people should have the right to our own internal government. So this is kind of the first time that we tell the king, that we've got a beef with him, that we need to be heard, otherwise we're going to split off and break up with the king and go do our own thing. Let's keep reading. It says, "But out of necessity and the mutual interest of both countries, we cheerfully consent to the acts of the British Parliament, except for those related to taxation." So they're kind of backing off a little bit from their threat here. They're saying, we don't like this, we want our own internal government, but we want to get along. We don't want to go to war. We want to cheerfully consent. We want to smile on our face as we are following the laws, except the ones dealing with taxation. That's where we're drawing a line. The final sentence here says that it is necessary to the end the acts of Parliament that are violations of the rights of the colonists in order to restore harmony between Great Britain and the American colonies. So it's saying that we need to end these taxes if we're going to keep getting along. And that if the taxes don't end, then we're going to have problems. And down here it says the source, First Continental Congress, Declaration and Resolves. That's the name of the letter that we sent to the king, and it was made in October 1774. All right, so we've got the document over here on the left side of my screen. On the right side, we've got my copy of the answer sheet. So question one, it kind of overlaps with the text box. I apologize a little bit. Maybe if you're doing on this on paper, it's not going to matter. If you're doing this electronically, I'm just hitting my space bar a lot, and then I'm finding out where it was, rather who wrote this. And it says it a couple of times. It is the First Continental Congress. Continental Congress is the author. So remember, they're the group of people representing America. Question two, what might this document be trustworthy and useful for learning about? Okay, so we know that it's supposed to represent the feelings of all Americans, and the time is 1774. So this can tell us how America feel. Actually, I should not write USA because we're not the United States of America yet. I'll say how the colonists feel about the new tax laws, because that's mostly what the guys are talking about here. So it can tell us how the average person is feeling about the new tax laws. Third sourcing question, it says, when was this written? We look up at the top there, or we look at the bottom where it says source, and we know it's 1774. Okay, so we got the sourcing questions out of the way. We got 4 questions left for this document. Close reading. It says, based on this document, what complaints did the Congress have against Britain? So for this, we're going to look into that kind of indented section here. And it says that people are not given the right to vote and we're being taxed without our permission. So remember that catchphrase from the notes. They're basically complaining about no taxation without representation. They don't like the fact that they have to give up money, but they don't get anything in return, in their opinion. The British would say that they're getting protection in return, but the Americans don't see it like that. Question 5. Based on this document, what things did Congress want Britain to do? Okay, so it's related to that claim of that problem that we said. Basically, get rid of the new taxes is what they are asking the king to do, to get rid of the new taxes. All right, last 2 questions, you see they're labeled contextualization. So we're going to try to put this in the broader scheme of things. We're going to try to make it fit in the timeline of history. So in italics it says, Britain fought to protect the 13 colonies in the French and Indian War, which took place from 1754 to 1763. The war was costly, so when it ended, Britain increased taxes on its colonies. Then the question that we're going to answer, does this historical context support the argument that the American Revolution was virtuous? Okay, so this context tells us why the taxes are going up, but it doesn't really explain why the Americans don't like them. It doesn't really explain how things are made a little bit more clear. So I would argue that this does not have anything to do with why we were fighting. So it doesn't really say why we were fighting, but it does show that we asked nicely. So instead of just going and guns blazing into the British forts and declaring war and starting killing people, essentially what this letter does is it shows that we asked nicely. So if at the end of the activity you are kind of considering what documents support your argument, what documents don't, this one is kind of showing that that the Americans were trying to be peaceful about it. So we tried to be peaceful. So while it doesn't necessarily talk about our reason for fighting, it does show that we try to be peaceful. So in conclusion, I would say that yes, this does support the idea that the war was worth fighting, because it shows that we try to do things nice and they didn't listen. All right, question number 7. The colonists had no representatives in Parliament, the body of Britain's government that makes laws. So the colonists had no say in how Britain taxed them. Taxation without representation was one of the biggest complaints of the revolutionaries. So next question here. Does this historical context support the argument that the American Revolution was virtuous? Explain. Well, it kind of talks a little bit more about this idea of taxation was a problem. So if that it was our only reason for fighting, then if we were just fighting about money, then it could kind of relate to that. But overall, I would say this context does not. Because we already knew that from the notes. We already knew this context, so it didn't add anything. Okay, so now we know that the colonists asked nicely and that the Britain still didn't make them happy. What we're going to do is we're going to go through the rest of these documents, and you're going to take a look at, I believe, 4 more of them, and you'll do that through page 5 in your answer sheet. Then you need to pick a side and either argue that the American Revolution was virtuous, meaning it was worth it, it was fought for the right reasons, and that it had a good outcome to justify a whole bunch of people dying. Or you could say, no, the American Revolution was not virtuous, and you can say that it's not worth all those sacrifices. Either way, you got to choose one side to support for your must-do activity. You got to choose one side to support and then show which documents supported that idea. If you want to do the should-do activities, you'll get a 16 out of 20 instead of a 14 out of 20. And you can do both A and B. And then if you want the full 20 out of 20 to get the aspire to do activities, you'll do A, B, and C. And in section C, you'll synthesize the information, you'll put it together in one paragraph, and again, answer that question, was the American Revolution virtuous? All right, I know this was a lot of information. I know that it's a big activity, so please make sure you are asking questions if you get stuck, and I will be happy to help you out. Have a wonderful day.